My mother left when I was 5 and never returned. After her death, her husband demanded I give up my inheritance. You were nothing to her. My absent dad called next, I want my share. They never expected what the judge said that made them both collapse in court. So I'm 25. I work full-time and currently live with my grandpa. I've been with him for as long as I can remember. My dad passed away when I was really young, so it's just been me and my grandparents for most of my life. My mom, well, she pretty much vanished after my dad died when I was 5, left me with my grandparents and just disappeared. No brothers or sisters. No one else to turn to. Just my grandpa and grandma. I used to ask all the time, when's mom coming back? My grandpa would always smile, kind of sad-like, and tell me not to worry. But eventually, I got it. She wasn't coming back. So, yeah, it's been me and them ever since. My grandparents were in their 50s when they took me in, and they weren't rich or anything, but they were the best. They made sure I never felt like I was missing out on anything. You know? I mean, I wasn't spoiled, but they got me what I needed. And they worked hard to make sure I had a good life. Grandpa, he was a tough one, always working odd jobs, whether it was at the local hardware store or doing yard work. He never complained, always smiling, always taking care of me. I still remember how proud I felt when I started school. My grandpa saved up enough to buy me this cool little backpack with superhero characters on it. It was bright blue. I think I wore it out in, like, a month from carrying it around everywhere, even when I wasn't in school. I know it wasn't easy for them to get me nice stuff like that, but they always found a way. That's just how they were. As I got older, I started to realize how hard they were working to keep everything together. My grandma, before she got sick, had a regular job at the post office. She was quiet, but you could tell she loved me even though she wasn't the type to show it with words. I'd catch her sneaking candy into my lunchbox or letting me watch TV past bedtime when Grandpa wasn't looking. She didn't talk much, but she showed she cared in little ways like that. By the time I was in high school, things were starting to get more complicated. My school was a big deal to me. I was always good with school stuff. You know? Studying, doing homework, all that. And I had this dream to go to a really good high school. Not just any public school, but one of the top ones. It felt like the only way out of the situation we were in. Like, I needed to do something with my life to make everything worth it. I remember this conversation I had with my grandpa when I was in middle school. We were sitting at the table eating dinner, and he just kind of casually says, you know, Johnny, don't stress too much about going to a public high school. Choose the one you like. I didn't really get it at the time, but now looking back, I know he was worried about the money. Private schools were expensive, and even though they never let on, I knew they were struggling. So I said, but what about you and Grandma? Isn't it going to be tough if I go to a private school? He just smiled and shook his head. We'll manage, he said. We've got some savings. That's how he always was, trying to make everything seem okay even when it wasn't. I wasn't dumb though. I knew they were doing everything for me, so I made a promise to myself that I was going to work hard and get into the best public high school I could. I wasn't going to let them spend more money they didn't have. I studied like crazy, like I'm talking late nights, early mornings, flashcards everywhere. And when the entrance exam came, I nailed it. Got accepted into one of the best public high schools around. I'll never forget the look on my grandparents' faces when I told them. My grandma, who barely ever said a word, got up from her chair, came over to me, and gave me this big, tight hug. I swear it was the first time I'd ever seen her cry. They were so proud of me. I think that was the first time I really felt like I was doing something right. You know? Like, I was paying them back for everything they had done for me. Grandma even booked a table at this nice restaurant in town to celebrate. We didn't do things like that often, so it was a big deal. I felt like the luckiest guy in the world that day, but high school wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. A couple of years in, things started to change. I'd come home after school and the house felt different, like this cloud was hanging over everything. I remember walking into the kitchen one day and seeing my grandpa sitting at the table, his head in his hands. I asked him what was wrong, and he looked up at me with these tired eyes and said, "Grandma's sick." I didn't know what to say. I mean, what do you say to that? I was just a teenager, and I didn't really understand how serious it was at first, but it got bad. Real bad. Grandma was in and out of the hospital, and every time she came home, she looked worse than before. She stopped working, and Grandpa had to pick up more hours at his jobs just to keep things running. I felt so helpless. I couldn't do anything to fix it. You know? I tried to keep up with school, but it was hard to focus when all I could think about was what was happening at home. I'd stay up late studying, but I'd also be worrying about whether Grandma would be okay. And Grandpa, he was always so strong, but I could see the cracks. He was exhausted. There were days when he'd come home from work, sit down on the couch, and just stare at the wall for what felt like forever before he'd get up to make dinner. I started helping out more, doing whatever I could, cooking, cleaning, whatever needed to be done. I didn't want him to worry about me on top of everything else. He'd always tell me, "Don't worry, Johnny. Focus on your school. You've got a bright future ahead." But how could I focus on school when it felt like everything around me was falling apart? Grandma's condition kept getting worse. It was like this slow, painful decline. One day, she'd be okay, and the next, she'd be back in the hospital. I hated it. Hated seeing her like that. Hated seeing Grandpa so worn out, and I hated that I couldn't do anything to make it better. That's when things really started to hit me. Life wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be fair, and it definitely wasn't going to be what I expected. Things got worse after Grandma's diagnosis. It wasn't something I could ignore anymore, and honestly, I didn't want to. Every time I walked into the house, it felt heavier, like this weight I couldn't shake off. Grandma wasn't just sick. She was getting worse fast, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I was a teenager, and I'd never seen someone I loved just fade like that. Grandpa tried to keep it together, but I could see the cracks. He didn't complain, but he didn't have to. You could just tell. There were days he'd come home from work. His shoulders all slumped like the weight of the world was on him. He'd smile at me, ask about school, make dinner like he always did, but it wasn't the same. We both knew it. Grandma was in and out of the hospital so much I couldn't even keep track of the appointments anymore. Some days she'd be there for a week, other times just a few days. But each time she came back, she looked worse. It was like watching someone slowly disappear. She used to be this strong, quiet woman, and now she was weak, tired, and couldn't even get out of bed half the time. It was tough to see. I wanted to help, but what could I do? I was just a kid. Grandpa was the one holding everything together, or at least trying to. He started taking on even more part-time jobs. It wasn't just about paying bills anymore. There were the hospital costs, medication, everything. And even though Grandma had insurance, it didn't cover everything. I didn't really understand the financial part of it back then, but I knew we were struggling. I could hear him late at night talking on the phone with the hospital, trying to figure out payment plans, arguing with him sometimes. I tried to step up to help out more around the house. I'd make dinner if he was late. I'd clean, do laundry, anything that I thought might take some of the pressure off. I even got a part-time job at the local store to bring in a little extra cash. It wasn't much, but it was something. But no matter what I did, it didn't feel like enough. And honestly, it wasn't. How could it be? The worst part was seeing Grandma like that. I'd come home from school and go straight to her room to check on her. Some days she'd be asleep. Other days she'd be sitting up trying to act like everything was fine. She'd tell me stories or try to crack a joke, but even that was fading. There was this one day, I'll never forget it. I walked into her room, and she looked up at me with this weak smile and said, "Johnny, I'm sorry." I didn't know what to say. Sorry for what? For being sick? For not being able to be the grandma I remembered? I just sat there with her, holding her hand, not knowing what to say. Because what do you say to that? Nothing I could say would fix it. As time went on, things just kept getting harder. Grandma had retired by then, and it was all on Grandpa to keep us afloat. I could see how tired he was, but he never let on. He'd say, "Don't worry, Johnny. I'm fine." But he wasn't. He was running himself into the ground, and I knew it. There were days when he'd come home from work, and I could tell he'd been crying, but he'd never admit it. That wasn't his style. And then there was the hospital. It felt like every other day, there was some new complication with Grandma's health. The doctors would explain things to me, but I didn't understand half of it. I just knew it wasn't good. One night, Grandpa and I went to visit her, and she was hooked up to all these machines. She was barely awake. And when she saw us, she tried to smile, but she couldn't. That's when it hit me, really hit me, that she wasn't going to get better. I didn't know how to deal with that. How do you prepare yourself for losing someone you've lived with your whole life? Someone who's been there every day, even if they weren't the loud talkative type. I felt like I was losing my whole foundation. I'd go to school trying to focus, trying to act like everything was normal, but it wasn't. My friends didn't really get it. They'd ask, "How's your grandma?" And I'd just say, "She's okay." Because what else could I say? No one my age was dealing with this stuff. They were worried about grades or what they were doing over the weekend, and here I was worrying about whether my grandma would make it through the night. Grandpa started talking about applying for assistance from the government. We'd always been able to manage, but now we needed help. I didn't know much about how that worked, but I could tell he didn't want to do it. He was proud, and asking for help wasn't in his nature, but we didn't have a choice. I remember the day he went to the city office to apply. He came home with this big stack of papers, all these forms he had to fill out, and I could see the frustration in his eyes. "It's confusing," he said, sitting at the table, staring at all the paperwork. I sat down with him and helped as much as I could, but it felt overwhelming. Eventually, we got through it. And a few weeks later, we got the approval. I thought that would make things easier, but it didn't. It just made everything feel more real. We were now officially on assistance, and that felt like a loss in itself. As Grandma's condition got worse, I could see the toll it was taking on Grandpa. He was still working, still doing everything he could, but it wasn't enough. It never was. There was one night after Grandma had another bad episode where he just broke down. I'd never seen him like that. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands covering his face, and just cried. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I couldn't because I didn't believe that myself. We were running on empty, and it felt like no matter how hard we tried, we were just sinking deeper. I was scared. Scared for Grandma, scared for Grandpa, and honestly, scared for myself. What would happen if we lost her? How would we manage? I had all these questions swirling around in my head and no answers. Then one day, after Grandma had been in the hospital for a few days, we got the call. I don't remember who answered it, but I remember the silence that followed. The kind of silence where you just know something bad has happened. Grandma had passed away. I didn't cry at first. I just stood there, numb, like my brain couldn't process it. She was gone. Just like that. And everything we'd been holding on to, all the hope that maybe she'd get better, it was gone too. That night, Grandpa sat with me on the couch. He didn't say much, just held my hand. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like a kid again. A scared, lost kid who didn't know what the future held. After Grandma passed, everything felt strange. The house was too quiet, too empty. She had been sick for a while, but somehow we always hoped she'd come home again. When that didn't happen, I think both Grandpa and I just felt kind of lost. It's not like we talked about it or anything, but the way we moved around the house avoiding certain rooms, staying busy, it was obvious. I threw myself into work. I had graduated high school by then and had to put off college to help out at home. There was no way I was going to leave Grandpa alone, especially not after everything he'd done for me. So I found a full-time job at a local store. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and that's what we needed at the time. Grandpa, though, he was the one I worried about. He didn't complain. He never did. But I could see how tired he was. He was still working his part-time jobs even after everything, and I knew he felt guilty. One day, I came home from work and found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills like they were about to jump up and bite him. I sat down across from him. "What's wrong?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. He just sighed and shook his head. "It's these bills, Johnny. We're managing, but barely. I'm just so tired." I didn't know what to say. I mean, I was tired too, but I wasn't going to say that. I had to step up. "Don't worry, Grandpa. I'm working full-time now. Remember? We'll get through this." He gave me a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're too young to be worrying about bills. This isn't the life I wanted for you." That hit me hard. I could tell he felt guilty, like he'd somehow failed me, but I didn't see it that way. He and Grandma had raised me, given me everything they could, and now it was my turn to help. I wasn't going to let him carry all that guilt. "Grandpa, you did everything for me. I wouldn't be where I am without you and Grandma. Don't think for a second this is your fault." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. After that, I made it my mission to work harder, take on more shifts, do whatever I could to make sure he didn't have to worry so much. It wasn't easy, but it was what I had to do. A few months went by, and things started to settle into a routine. Work, bills, sleep, repeat. It wasn't much of a life, but it was ours. Then one day, out of nowhere, we got a phone call. It was weird because nobody ever called us. I answered, and on the other end was this man I didn't recognize. "Hello. Is this Jonathan?" he asked. "Yeah. Who's this?" There was a pause, and then he said, I'm your mother's husband." My stomach dropped. My mother? I hadn't heard from her in, 20 years. And now all of a sudden her husband was calling me? I didn't even know she was married. "Okay," I said slowly, not sure what to expect. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but your mother passed away in a car accident." I didn't feel anything. I mean, what was I supposed to feel? She had abandoned me when I was a kid, and now I was supposed to care that she was dead? "I see," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He kept talking, but I barely listened. Something about the accident, the funeral, blah blah. It wasn't until he said something about inheritance that I snapped back to attention. "Inheritance?" I repeated. "Yes," he said, and I could hear the tension in his voice. "She left behind some assets, and as her biological child, you have a claim to them." Now I was confused. This woman hadn't been in my life for years, and suddenly I was entitled to her money? It didn't feel real. I didn't even want anything from her. Why would I? But then he said something that really rubbed me the wrong way. "Would you consider giving up your inheritance rights? It would make things easier for us. I mean, for me. We don't have any kids, and your claim complicates things." I couldn't believe it. He didn't even try to hide what this was about. It wasn't about my mother's memory or closure or anything like that. It was about money, and not for me, but for him. He wanted me to just walk away, pretend like I didn't exist so he could have it all to himself. No, I said firmly. There was a pause. No? That's right, I said, my voice stronger now. I'm not giving up anything. I didn't even know about this inheritance. But now that I do, I'm not just going to give it up because it's convenient for you. He didn't like that answer. But you didn't even have a relationship with her. What difference does it make to you? That hit a nerve. You're right, I said. I didn't have a relationship with her. She left me with my grandparents and disappeared, but that doesn't mean I don't deserve what's rightfully mine. I could hear him fuming on the other end of the line. This isn't fair, he muttered. I don't care if it's fair to you, I snapped. She was my mother, whether she acted like it or not, and I have a right to whatever she left behind. He hung up after that. I sat there for a few minutes trying to process what had just happened. I hadn't thought about my mother in years. And now, all of a sudden, her death was bringing all this drama into my life. I told Grandpa about the call, and he wasn't surprised. I always knew your mother was selfish, he said. But this, trying to take everything for himself, that's low even for her. We decided to consult a lawyer just to make sure we knew what we were getting into. I wasn't sure how much money we were talking about, but it didn't matter. I wasn't going to back down, not after everything we'd been through. Then, as if things weren't complicated enough, I got another call a few days later. This time, it was my biological father. I hadn't heard from him since I was 5 either, but apparently, he'd found out about my mother's death and the inheritance situation. Johnny, it's your father, he said when I picked up. His voice sounded different than I remembered, older, rougher. What do you want? I asked, not bothering to hide my irritation. I heard about your mother. I'm sorry. He paused, and I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. I also heard about the inheritance. Of course he did. It wasn't about checking on me or reconnecting after all these years. It was about the money, just like with my stepdad. Let me guess, I said, you think you deserve a cut too? Well, actually, yes, he replied, surprising me with his directness. I was married to her when you were born. I have rights here too. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Rights? You abandoned me when I was 5. You don't have any rights to anything. Look, son, he started, but I cut him off. Don't call me that. You don't get to disappear for 20 years and then call me son when you want something. There was silence on the other end, and for a second, I thought he might have hung up. But then he spoke. Again, his voice colder. I'll be contacting my lawyer. Don't think this is over. And just like that, I was now fighting both my stepdad and my biological father for an inheritance from a mother who hadn't wanted anything to do with me. The absurdity of it all would have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating. I told Grandpa about this new development, and I could see the anger flash in his eyes. They're vultures, he said simply. Both of them. They didn't care about you then, and they don't care about you now. I knew he was right, but it didn't make the situation any easier. Now I had 2 fronts to fight on, and I was already exhausted. The lawyer advised me to stand my ground. You have a legitimate claim as her child, he explained. Neither your stepdad nor your father can take that away from you. So that's what I did. I dug in my heels and prepared for a fight that I never asked for but wasn't going to back down from. There was no way I was going to let these 2 men, who had contributed nothing to my life, take what was rightfully mine. As the legal battle dragged on, both my stepdad and father tried different tactics. My stepdad claimed that my mother had intended for him to have everything, while my father argued that he deserved a portion since he was her first husband. It was exhausting, dealing with their constant demands and the endless stream of legal paperwork. There were days when I wondered if it was all worth it. The stress was taking a toll on both me and Grandpa. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered all the years of struggle, all the sacrifices my grandparents had made for me. This inheritance could finally give us some security, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away. After months of back and forth, we finally reached a settlement. My stepdad and father would each get a small portion, and I would get the majority. It wasn't the outcome they wanted, but faced with the prospect of a lengthy court battle they might lose entirely, they reluctantly agreed. When it was finally over, I felt a mixture of relief and emptiness. There was no sense of triumph, just the quiet satisfaction that comes from standing your ground. The inheritance wasn't life-changing, but it was enough to pay off some bills, set aside some savings, and most importantly, let Grandpa finally retire from all those odd jobs he'd been working. Watching him relax for the first time in years made everything worthwhile. He'd given up so much for me, and now I could give something back to him. As for my stepdad and father, I haven't heard from either of them since the settlement. I doubt I ever will, now that there's no money to be gained. And honestly, I'm fine with that. My family isn't defined by blood or legal ties. It's defined by love, sacrifice, and being there when it matters. Grandpa is my real family. He always has been, And he always will be. And as I sit with him on the porch, watching the sunset, I realize that despite everything, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. You did good, Johnny, Grandpa says, his voice soft but proud. I smile at him. Thanks, Grandpa. He nods, then says something that catches me off guard. It's time for you to start thinking about yourself now. You've been taking care of everyone else for so long, but you've got a whole life ahead of you. And for the first time, I feel like maybe he's right. Maybe it is time to think about what I want, what my future holds. Because after everything we've been through, we're finally okay. And that's enough for now.